So, and in the same vein, or in a similar vein, we're moving forward to thinking, because trauma-informed care has been one of our sort of coexisting agendas with the expansion work, to hear from two further colleagues who are also representing other colleagues in the safety and mental health settings project, Tim Bryson and Shirley McNicholas. Now, it's just brilliant to be able to say something like that we seek to embed practice around trauma-informed care that Ebony's just outlined for us right across the capital. So that sounds incredibly ambitious. But Tim and Shirley certainly will tell us a little bit more about the work that they've been doing. Over to Tim and Shirley. Thank you. Morning.
Morning.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you about the Safety and Mental Health Settings project and the work we're doing to promote a trauma-informed approach. My name is Tim Bryson. I'm project manager for the Safety and Mental Health Settings project. I'm a mental health nurse and I work as a freelance healthcare consultant and was previously a director of nursing. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the work of our project and then hand over to Shirley McNicholas, who is our trauma-informed approach lead, to say more detail about that component. So one thing to say, first of all, is happy birthday to the PPN, and we are delighted to be working in partnership with you, and I think there are lots of aspects that we can work on together. Next slide, please. So in terms of the project, the Safety and Mental Health Settings project, we got going in 2019. And really, the project is focused on addressing the issue of violence and aggression within acute care and PICU services right across the capital. All of the London mental health trusts are partners to the project, and we're working closely with lived experience colleagues as well. So our overall aim is to share learning about this entrenched problem and to standardise and improve best practice wherever we can. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have done a significant amount of project work to date. And if you're interested to see more of this and the publications, please do go and visit the NHS Futures web workspace, which is at the end of these slides when they're circulated. We've undertaken some data analysis and including a detailed thematic analysis of a number of incidents of violence and aggression. And of course, it is a common problem. It's a significant and a serious problem. And really the work we did showed that there was a need to improve safety and particularly to focus on relational security and to improve culture within acute care and PICU. So we did quite a bit of work understanding the views of service user colleagues, their views on experiences of violence and aggression, their suggestions for improvement. And in summary, there was a very strong emphasis on the need for early intervention, greater visibility and accessibility of staff, and a much more collaborative culture. So we're taking forward a number of interventions. We are being evaluated by the NCCMH during 21-22. And we have in particular developed a trauma-informed approach position statement, which Shirley will talk with you some more about in a moment. Next slide, please. During 2022, we are offering two training programs. The first is a leadership program for those people who have a role promoting safety and taking forward safety improvement. And then the second program is to help people acquire skills and understanding in something called the See, Think, Act framework, which has been widely used in forensic services, but we have successfully piloted that within acute care and PICU, and we believe it has a major contribution to make in terms of strengthening relational security. So one thing to say is that applications for both of those training programs are open, and please do either ask Shirley or myself for more information, or go to our NHS Futures website to find more information on those. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in addition to those two major training programs, we are taking forward work to promote a trauma-informed approach within acute care and PICU, but also more generally across mental health services. And in order to take that forward, we are planning to launch a community of practice, and we have a launch event scheduled for the 8th of March. And the idea of the community of practice is that it will be a learning network, sharing of experiences, sharing of improvement work, sharing of good practice, and involving a wide cross-section of colleagues, including lived experience colleagues. So we'd be delighted if you were able to join us at that launch event on the 8th of March. And we have a number of activities planned in terms of events and virtual networking to take that forward. So on that note, I'll hand over now to Shirley, who's going to tell you in a bit more detail about some of our work in relation to a trauma-informed approach.
Thanks very much, Tim, and thank you very much for having me. If we just go to the next slide, just as way of introduction, I've worked for 38 years in acute mental health services, and the last 25 developing a women-only crisis house. And I want to kind of give a shout out to Ebony, really, as I did my training at the Women and Girls Network. And I think the women's movement in mental health and the survivor user campaigning for the last 30 years has really brought us to start talking about being trauma-informed. So that's definitely the foundation of trauma-informed ideas, has come from the survivor movement and from the women's movement. So it was great to kind of connect with that today. So I work for Camden and Islington Trust as one of the trauma-informed leads, and I still project manage the Women's Crisis House, but I also work for AVA, Against Violence and Abuse, as a freelance consultant, and really pleased to work alongside Tim, developing trauma-informed approaches within the safety and mental health settings. And we've worked over the last year to come up with this kind of trauma-informed position statement, which we sent to all trusts who are already on a journey of being trauma-informed. There's lots of pockets of good practice, and really that we are talking about a trauma-informed organisational approach and not just a trauma-informed care approach, because as people have spoken about this morning, this is political, this is social, this is intersectional. And so it's not just about the therapeutic offer, it's about that kind of wider picture of how the organisation traumatises people. So this has really been brought into this idea of supporting a safety culture to reduce the violence and aggression that people experience within acute and PQ, the people we serve and the people who work in those services, and that sexual violence is part of violence and aggression and is sometimes not named within that work. So the next slide, please. I'm sure I'm speaking to kind of the people who know all of this, but it's so important that we actually are humble in what we think we all know and take stock of what we mean by whole organisational change and trauma-informed approaches. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Fallett and Harris, who really talk about the fact that this cultural shift that I hope, are all signing up to in all these statutory organisations is that this needs to start at the top for leadership. So boards need to be trauma-informed to understand and acknowledge issues that bring people to services. Language and power are key in statutory mental health services, particularly in acute and PQ, and the language we use, such as patient disposal, as a language, for example, of how we move people from one ward to another or discharge people, is an example of really traumatizing language to use on people, even if they're not in the room. Power and control are the bedrock and coercion of domestic abuse. They exist in mental health trust and in services and in us as professionals. So even if you don't work in acute or PQ, you still have a lot of power and control over people, and it's very important to acknowledge that. As people have said before, that intersectional layering, and that boards need champions to really take forward this work. And really PQ and acute are some of the most, might be the most extreme end of traumatizing services. Next slide, please. I've only got kind of 3 minutes, so I'm going to whistle stop through these. Next slide, please. So these kind of pillars, I think, as Ebony was talking about what to be trauma-informed at an organisational level, needing to recognise and acknowledge what childhood adversity is, as we've heard of today, and trauma. These children we spoke about before are the adults we now serve. We need to see this in our policies and practices around restorative and just culture for staff, as well as different policies that reflect on the therapeutic offer. We need to create much better environment. So I would really call to all of you to think about the environments you work in. It's not just what you offer therapeutically. Psychologists are very powerful, and you can really influence what the environments are like for people to come into and be served in and for you to work in. Again, not just about what you do in the therapy room. And those guiding principles in all trauma-informed models at the bottom. So the next slide, please. So really, when we're thinking about trauma in acute and PQ services, we know the most traumatised people end up at the most extreme end of mental health services. And as Ebony talked about, that discrimination of Black men particularly, and Black women, I would say, get the heavier end of psychotic illnesses and end up being sectioned, forced to take medication against their will. So the evidence of that layering of trauma and ACEs and then ending up in PQ, acute and prisons, then we really need to acknowledge that's where we need to invest a trauma-informed approach the most and not the least. Next slide, please. So thinking about safety, which is the word that, safety in mental health settings, we could have days talking about safety, but safety is only one component of a trauma-informed approach. Without kind of that interpersonal understanding of interpersonal trauma, without us understanding the acute and PQ services, have increasingly created more mechanistic ways of keeping people safe, more body-worn cameras, observational technology, CCTV, without kind of understanding how traumatizing those things might be for people who've been sexually abused, observed, watched in all sorts of harmful ways. And some service users say it's actually gaslighting to try and be trauma-informed in mental health services. How do we kind of get back to that sense of asylum in acute and PQ? Is the questions we need to ask ourselves. So the next slide, please. So these are just some ideas of therapeutic ways to create safety and move away from risk management to safety planning. And I won't go through all of those, but these are things to look at, that these are actual ways that you can do things differently in your services and challenge the organisation that you're in. The next slide, please. So I think really, as Tim has said, I won't go through them again, but we are part of a London-wide piece of work. We hope to network with the PPN network to really kind of build on this work. We don't want to be overwhelmed and say it's all-encompassing, but it really is about the social and political world that Estelle mentioned from the beginning around kind of Black Lives Matter, the violence against women and girls, and those kinds of issues. So thank you for your time today. I put a timer on. And good luck for the rest of the event.
I think that was so helpful. I don't know how you managed to get so many important messages in such a short space of time. I do sort of apologise for that pressure, but I think you've really got us thinking, and certainly inspired to take some of those key messages forward. Absolutely vital that we think of those things. So thank you very much. We look forward to really your events are coming up, so we're looking forward to the launch event for that work, which is fantastic. Thank you, Shirley and Tim. I'm sad that I have to move on. As you say, Shirley, we could spend the whole day on it, never mind just a short section of the morning, but we're very appreciative that you joined us today.